And
So you're learning that part, and so as it gets interesting and you have a simple example, come back and show us actually doing that. That'd be cool.
okay.
Is Spencer involved at all in your conversations? 'Cause I know
Not
he
that
kind of wrote that tutorial and he's interested, but learn it and then share it with him.
Okay.
Okay, super.
So that's me.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Hit the left, go back, there you go.
So mine is the Institute one. Since last time we met, I've started learning more about how the API gateway and the WSO2 interact and talk with each other, and trying to figure out how more of the Swagger documents will work into this process. I haven't got very far in that, but that's what I'm working on studying.
Okay, you're overlapping a little bit with Alyssa, which is great. She actually has a little, simple Swagger document for the Hello Lambda. You might want to grab it from her and see what's going on. Now that does lead to one other interesting thing, and I may go through and reorganize this folder a little bit, okay? And so I'll make a subfolder for each domain, like right now there's so much junk in there, so okay? I'm expecting that you guys will add documents to this, okay? So for example, I would expect that you would end up with a document that in there that's almost for each component. All right, so you would say, oh, okay, well, I'm working on my cacher, all right? So here's a link that goes to, this is where my source code is in GitHub, and here's where I'm putting my DynamoDB, and here's a JSON structure that describes what objects I'm actually storing in my cacher, and here's a link to, I want to see that kind of thing. And then you may have a section in there that's more like English that says, and the policy for my Institute cacher is we keep objects for 30 days, at which point they're invalid and I clean them up. Or that kind of thing. Does that make sense to you what I'm saying? So build out a specification document for every single one. And as I start to see examples, they may be links to GitHub or they may be these kinds of things. Like, Melissa said, should I actually put the source code in for it? No. Put the link to GitHub. Should I actually put the Swagger document, or the document in Google? No, put a link to my Swagger document in GitHub. But if there's policies or things that need to be written, rules, put them in your document and put them in there. Okay? If you aren't documenting what you're doing, it's going to be real hard for somebody else to pick it up and figure out what in the heck's going on, just based on my picture alone. Okay? But you may also put in there things like, oh, and by the way, here's my run scope. Here's my link to my run scope test, and here's the way that I'm testing one thing. Here's the example tests, putting in other my use cases. My thing should be able to do the following things that I'm testing for. All right? You're not producing documents as you're going along. Eventually, you're only doing half the job. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do you want us to create like our own GitHub repositories then, or just like sub of the API repo sandbox?
Every one of these domains should have its own GitHub repository, at least. Does that make sense?
Okay.
It may be that you need multiple GitHub repositories that you're like some of your significant pieces of code you're going to want to deploy separately. Okay?
So maybe the Scather is a separate one, and maybe the Lambda for the cacher is a separate one. Is that what you're thinking, Doug?
It could very easily end up that way. Though you may say, let's be honest, some of these things are pretty standard stuff. My Institute cacher, my circuit breaker, my scraper, my spewer. If I change them, I'm just going to change them all at once. Okay? So if I deploy any one, I'm going to deploy them all at once. Okay? So it's okay if I have a GitHub repository that ends up producing several components. All that implies to me is I deploy them all at once. I can't deploy them independently. You may have some of your components, like your scatter gather or your self-reported Institute one there, that changes often enough and independently because they're constantly giving you little tweaks and rules that you want to say, I want to be able to deploy those independently. and so you put them in their own GitHub repository. Your GitHub repository drives your deployment engine. Everything in that GitHub repository gets deployed in one unit. So some of them it's just, I mean, you guys will figure out that balance. Some of them just always go together. Some of them you want to be able to do independently. But at a minimum, you deploy in your domain only, so you must have at least one GitHub repository for your domain. That's something I haven't pushed, but as you get a little further along, that's something you need to sit down with Tom and whatnot and say, okay, let me sit down, let me do it. I have an institute. Well, and if you put them all in there in one GitHub repository at the beginning, I'm okay with that. But as you learn more about your components, you may need to say, I need to break this one out because it needs to be deployed independently, so I'll put it off over here and do that. Does that make sense? Okay. So going back to your example here, it may be hard to see why you'd want one independent, but over here, like in my example here, your Elasticsearch one, you may have your identity API stuff all working and nothing's changing, but they're constantly bugging you about changing the Elasticsearch engine. Well, I want this in here, or I don't, that kind of stuff. Make that its own separate deployment. You can change it as often as you want to that way. Okay? None of you are at that point yet, but you gotta get there real quick. But just have your GitHub repository, you understand the ramifications, boom, and get your code in there.
Okay, Roger, what else did you want to show us?
That's all that I have for now.
Okay. All right, David, are you next?
I think we're direct I could show. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, by the way, Roger, I'm gonna play a little, you're saying that next thing you wanna work on is understanding the Swagger document for your domain and how to put that into WSO2 and all. Okay, I'm gonna play this, I'll say this trick on Melissa. So point to the thing you're working on your diagram.
What I believe I'm working on is the University API right here.
No, you're not working on the University API. University API will consume your stuff. So take another guess. What do you think you're working on? You're close. It's a trick question.
Yeah, I don't know.
Point to the arrow in between the University API and the Institute API scatter gather. That arrow right there is what you're working on. That arrow represents the Swagger document and the connections to go from the University API to your solution. And Swagger document very much is a definition of your interface API. That's that one. Okay?
Makes sense.
Okay, is there anything else?
For me, I was only here for about an hour or two after the meeting yesterday, and what I was gonna do was to recreate the work that's already been done. So I started